Hey guys, thanks to a strange quirk of American firearms law, it is common practice to permanently attach a muzzle device to a short rifle barrel to prevent it from falling under the definition of the NFA and requiring a tax stamp. And with the suppressor market as hot as it is right now, a lot of guys are asking what the best barrel length is for pin and welding a suppressor mount. 14.5, 13.9, maybe even 13.7. There's a lot of heated discussion online about what the best barrel lengths are for pin and weld jobs, as well as what the best suppressor mount ecosystem is, so we're going to be talking about that today. But if you just want to skip to the end to get the answer without knowing the reason behind it, it is 11.5 inches, because this allows you to direct thread and pin and weld a Legacy Gemtech Trek 2 suppressor and hit your overall length requirements, creating the perfect one-stamp gun. If you'd still like to hear the rest of it, stick around. Today's video was made possible in part by our sponsor, Venture Surplus. The weather is starting to get colder, which means it's that time of the year when women chug pumpkin spice lattes and decorate with tiny gourds, and when men wear a cool jacket while bleeding out in the snow. If you're going outside in pursuit of a good death, make sure to layer up. Venture Surplus has a cold weather clothing category where you can find thermal base layers, hard and soft shell outer layers, and God's gift to warming layers, the waffle top. The waffle top shirt may look like it's inside out, but that's how grid fleece works. The waffle-like pattern of fleece traps pockets of warm air between the shirt and your body to provide insulation. If the waffle was on the outside, it would only provide a benefit if worn with an outer layer. The grid fleece thermal will still keep you warm and comfy if you remove your wind or water-resistant outer layer to get a little airflow. It also has thumb holes in the sleeves, so you can imagine you're a goth teenager, I guess. Check out Venture's selection of surplus cold weather clothing at the link in the video description and use the code provided to save 10% off your order. They also have waffle top hats, so your entire top half can be waffle. Thanks to Venture Surplus for sponsoring this channel. Let's get back to the show. The purpose of pinning and welding a muzzle device is to extend the legal overall barrel length of your rifle, as measured by the ATF, to just over 16 inches. According to the ATF, the muzzle device is considered in the length of the barrel only if it's permanently attached by means of putting a pin through the muzzle device and into a dimple in the barrel and then welding the pin in place, or by welding the whole muzzle device on, or allegedly by using high-temperature silver solder. This last one gets brought up every time the topic of pin and weld comes up, but nobody has ever done it before. Permanently attaching a muzzle device isn't just for suppressor use, but that's mostly what we're talking about today. Pin and weld has its place for clone build aesthetics, which is how you end up with the uncommon 14.7-inch barrel length on rifles like the H&R A2 government carbine, or pinned fake moderators on XM177 clones. Pinning a suppressor-compatible muzzle device, on the other hand, actually has some real benefits. 14.5-inch barrels have the most built-up inertia, so they're the most common choice for pin and welds, and if you choose 14.5 inches, you'll have the widest selection of possible muzzle devices to choose from. With the suppressor removed, the overall length of a 14.5, 13.9, or 13.7 pin and weld job is going to be the same. They all need to hit the same 16-inch target length, so with 13.9 or 13.7, you're trading barrel length for muzzle device length. Okay, but what about when the suppressor is attached? The suppressor should mount further back on the 13.7 than on a 14.5, right? Nope, you've been psyoped by Big Chemo. There aren't a ton of options for pin and weld muzzle devices on 13.7s because they're just way longer than a muzzle device normally needs to be. The whole reason 13.7-inch barrels were originally invented by Noveski was so that you could pin and weld a flaming pig to one and hit the 16-inch overall length. That's true, I read it on ARFCOM. Our baseline example here will be a Munition Works Joe carbine that's had a little bit of a nip-tuck job. This now has a 14.5-inch barrel with a pinned Plan B compatible Reardon R2 flash hider. This will not get to 16 inches on anything shorter than a 14.5-inch barrel. If we wanted a longer Plan B compatible muzzle device, Liberty Precision Machine makes a flash hider that can be pin and welded onto a 13.7 barrel. But the additional length is all at the back end, behind the taper and the threads. This results in exactly the same length as our example with the 14.5-inch barrel and the Reardon R2, both with and without the suppressor attached. So what would the point of this be? The answer is salvaging a build that already has a 13.7-inch barrel. Making the tines of the flash hider longer is not an option here. If they were any longer, they would run into the first baffle of the suppressor and you wouldn't be able to attach it. We see the same issue with Silencer Co., ASR, and Huxworks muzzle devices. The attachment system is designed around muzzle devices that can be pinned to a 14.5-inch barrel. If you want to go shorter, you have no choice but to add an extension to the back of the muzzle device. These extended muzzle devices are an option if you're stuck with a barrel and suppressor combination that won't work together any other way, but they're really just wasted material, so you should not consider them if you're starting from scratch. For now, if you want a 13.9-inch barrel, your options are limited to basically just Surefire and Dead Air Chemo, and if you want a 13.7 barrel, your option is the SOLGW Nox brake.
See if I can lose the rest of my hearing.
Oh, you can definitely do that.
Oh!
The dirty secret is that Surefire and Chemo-compatible suppressors don't mount any further back than our example of a Polonium K with a Reardon Atlas. Surefire and Chemo suppressor mount systems have big, ratcheting collars that take up a lot of space at the back of the suppressor. You can see on those muzzle devices that a big chunk of the back end is just there for lockup to the suppressor and isn't part of the functioning muzzle device. For the suppressor to mount all the way to the back of a very long muzzle device, it will either have a very long bulky mount like the Chemo system on a Sandman K, or it will have a very long blast chamber for the muzzle device to sit into. So much of the overall length of a Sandman K is taken up by the Chemo mount and the blast chamber that you end up with only a few baffles right at the tip. The Sandman K is a tiny bit shorter than the YHM Resonator K with the factory Phantom mount, another bulky mount system that takes up a lot of dead space. Switching the Resonator K over to the newer SRX mount, which has a very space-efficient dual-taper lockup instead of a big-ass ratcheting collar, cuts half an inch off the suppressor and doesn't affect function at all. This basically means there would be no difference in overall length with the suppressor attached between a 14.5 with a pinned YHM SRX and a Resonator K versus a 13.7 with a Nox brake and a Sandman K. Both of them will also perform pretty much the same, which is to say badly because those cans are too short to do anything but quote-unquote take the edge off. So if you're building a rifle to suit the Surefire or Dead Air Chemo suppressor you already have, you might consider choosing a 13.7 or 13.9 barrel to mitigate the added length of the mount system. But if you're not married to a suppressor ecosystem yet, weigh your options. I think a lot of guys put the cart before the horse and end up with a 13.7 gun with a pinned Nox brake. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it limits you to basically 2 suppressors. Sure, you can get a Chemo mount for any hub-compatible can, but for the love of God, don't. The common gas system for a modern 14.5, 13.9, or 13.7 is mid-length, and every little reduction in dwell time makes the gun a bit harder to tune. From what I've seen and read, the 13.7 mid is more difficult to get properly gassed than a 13.9 mid, which in turn is less forgiving than a 14.5 mid. So what's the best barrel length for a pin and weld job? It's 14.5 inches. I don't see any compelling reason to choose a 13.7 or 13.9 pin and weld unless you've already bought into a closed ecosystem. The Surefire and Chemo mount systems are still totally usable, but now we have new shit that's shorter, simpler, and lighter. The SRX system from YHM, the Plan B system from Reardon, and Q, kind of. The Spooky system from Cat, or the Xeno system from Dead Air. You can also just direct thread a suppressor to a 16-inch barrel. Reference my direct thread video for the reasons you might consider that instead. Will this always be the case? Maybe not. The muzzle devices on Huxworks cans, for example, are an important part of directing the gases in a way that the suppressor itself can harness them. So, in theory, Hux or any other company could design a suppressor with a longer blast chamber that takes advantage of a longer muzzle device. This might potentially improve suppressor performance rather than just being additional dead space behind the suppressor's actual baffle stack. If we were designing a system from the ground up to maximize suppressor performance and minimize overall length while also fitting into the funny little box created for us by the NFA, it might look something like a 13.7-inch barrel with a proprietary gas system length akin to the Roscoe Patrol, a pinned extra-long Huxworks flash hider, and a medium-length version of the Flow 5.56. Anyone is free to use this idea, as long as they let me shoot it. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you'd like to support this show, please subscribe to it on YouTube and check out the links in the video description. You can also become a YouTube member, which will allow you to react to comments from Mr. Guns and Gear with a picture of his own face. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. Wrestling rules, if that happens 3 times in a row,
oh,
you get
sorry,
the belt.
Shit. Hi. We weren't going to draw on your face.
She doesn't have her shoes on, so she's not fair game.